A few weeks ago I made reference to a mystery lens that I bought, but obviously didn't say what the lens was. Then in my last video around the Sony 20mm f1.8, I sneak peeked the lens, but again, didn't say what it was, just left it for people to guess. Well, that mystery lens right there is actually a Sony 85 1.8. But this is a Tokina 20mm f2, which a few of you guessed correctly. So congratulations, 100 hypothetical points to each of you. Now this lens I think is extremely underrated, and I don't think a lot of people actually realise that it even exists. Because I've seen so many people with the release of this new Sony 20mm f1.8 saying that they can't wait to get this lens, that it's an awesome lens that they've been waiting for ages to have that fast 20mm prime. And yet this thing's existed for over 2 years. Now in terms of price, at least in the UK at the moment, this retails brand new for anywhere between £700 to £800, which makes it a fair bit cheaper than the £950 that the new Sony lens is on pre-order for. Now, in the US, I know the new Sony lens is retailing for about $900, but I don't know off the top of my head what the Tokina is retailing for, but the wall magically does. Now, maybe Sony bringing out this new 20mm will actually drive down the price of this brand new. But this compared to the Sony, they're pretty similar lenses. They're both a 20mm focal length. The Sony's an f1.8, whereas this is an f2, but that's a third of a stop difference, which is negligible. They're both specific to Sony E-mount full frame compatible lenses. They're both about the same sort of size and a similar sort of weight. This is slightly heavier at 460 grams, whereas the Sony is sub 400, I believe. But even on a Sony a7 III body, this Tokina lens fits very nicely, doesn't feel particularly heavy, and the construction of this feels very solid with it all being metal. Now you do get a few extra little tricks with the Sony lens that you won't find on the Tokina. The Tokina only has a manual focus ring and that is it, whereas the Sony has your AF/MF selector switch, your focus hold button, and more importantly, a declickable aperture ring. But for a lot of people that might be entirely irrelevant, especially if you're only using it for stills. The Sony does also have a dual linear AF motor, which is near enough silent and extremely fast, whereas the autofocus motor on the Tokina is slightly more audible and not quite as fast and smooth. And is still compatible with Sony features like the eye autofocus, both in human and animal mode. And speaking of animals, those of you wanting to know where Rusty's got to, he's over there paying all the attention he usually does. The autofocus I would describe as acceptable, but not exceptional. It gets the job done, works extremely well if you're shooting stills, but for video the stuttering is quite noticeable, and coupled with that, heavy focus breathing at close focusing, which apparently is something that the Sony also suffers with. So for example, at the moment I'm filming on the Sony a6400 with the Sigma 16mm f1.4, and if I change the focusing from close to far away, you notice there's no real change to the framing of anything in the background. Whereas the Tokina, as you shift from close to far, you see everything in the frame suddenly changes very drastically. So if you're trying to shoot video with this, like in a vlogging style like this, where you're holding stuff up to the camera, it gets quite disorientating to watch, having the framing change oh so much. But that is only really an issue for those situations where you're working at very close proximity to the lens. Although in such a wide angle lens that can be quite often. Now, while the autofocus might be this lens's Achilles heel to a degree, the image quality certainly isn't, and I've been extremely impressed with the image quality from this lens. In the center of the frame, the image quality wide open at f2 is very sharp. The corners are slightly softer but still very usable, and there is a slight amount of vignetting, But once you get to f2.8, the vignetting all but clears up and the corners go to almost razor sharp, and there they remain throughout the entire aperture range. Even chromatic aberration and flaring seem to be very well controlled, and one thing that I've been using this lens for is astrophotography. I did some astrophotography shooting in Northern Ireland with this over the Christmas period and found that it handles coma very well also. So this for me has actually become my main landscape shooting lens now. Prior to this, I had the Sigma 20mm f1.4 art lens and the Sony 16-35 f4, and I sold them both and replaced it with this. Now you might be thinking, Dave, what the hell were you thinking doing that? Why would you sell a Sigma art lens and a wider angle lens just for the one lens? And really, it was twofold. I enjoyed using the 16-35 for landscape shooting, but the aperture was too restricted for nighttime shooting, whereas the Sigma had the complete opposite. It was great for nighttime shooting, but crap for daytime shooting because it was so big and heavy and it couldn't take filters. Because it's derived from a DSLR lens, the only square filters that it could potentially accept are at least 150mm or bigger. The 100mm systems that I use, it won't work and there's no front filter thread to screw anything onto. Whereas the Tokina has a nice little dainty 62mm front filter, which means I can use my square filter system with this, which makes this great for both nighttime and daytime shooting. Alright, it's not quite as wide as 16mm, but 20mm is still extremely wide and is a focal length I really enjoy using, and this is a lens that I really enjoy using, and overall I have been very impressed, mostly with the image quality. I think is phenomenal. The autofocus, like I said, is perfectly fine for stills, not the best for video, and leads me on to the final big conclusion question: should you get this or the new Sony lens? Now, based on the notion that the new price of this is about £800, I would say you might as well pay that extra £150 and get the Sony. While this is still a great lens, the Sony is slightly lighter than this, so is easier to carry around. You've got the AF/MF switch, the focus hole button, the declickable aperture ring. It'll have a faster, smoother autofocus system. It's a first-party lens, so it's going to probably work a little bit smoother, and for me would more than justify that little bit of extra price. But I didn't buy this brand new. I bought this second-hand for about £400, and I noticed when I was looking for it, there's not many copies of it available second-hand. It seems to be quite a rare lens to find. But if you can find one of these available second-hand, it's well worth a consideration over the Sony lens because it's a much better price to performance ratio. But that wraps it up for this video, guys. What do you make of the Tokina 20mm f2? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. While you're down there, if you haven't already, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and there is also a link to my Patreon account and merch store as well. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.